Welcome to Paladin Financial Talk. I'm your host, Nikki Foley, and we're dedicating this month to exploring aging, the resources for care, and how to manage the process and the cost associated with it. So I like to think chronologically, at least I've been taught to think chronologically. And last week we started with a guest, Nicole Myrie of Griswold Home Care, which is a non-medical home care company that staffs caregivers and provides in-home care services. So that means usually a caregiver is not in this situation. They don't have to be medically trained. It could be somebody that is just coming in to assist with something, to spend time with somebody in their home. And so that is the non-medical. And so what we're going to do is we're going to move on to the medical side of things today and talk the natural progression. I feel like after non-medical is potentially that medical level of care. And so as someone declines in their ability to care for themselves, they're faced with narrowing their options about what their living might look like. And so many of our clients talk about wanting to age in place, using family or non-medical and medical caregivers in the home. But for others, to live in a community might be the right type of decision for them. I know I tell my husband over and over, when I get to the point that I need some support, I want to go live in a facility because I want the fun that goes along with it. I want to play bingo. I want to do chair yoga. I want to be all about the atmosphere and the people around me. So today we are going to spend our time on the ins and the outs of what senior living communities might look like. And here we have a guest with us. She's going to give us firsthand information. Our guest is Amy Waterman she's the executive director of Edgewater in Blaine. Edgewood. Okay. Thank you. All right. So today we are going to explore the ins and outs of senior living communities, and giving us firsthand information as we have a guest with us today. It is Amy Waterman, who is the executive director of Edgewood in Blaine. That is a local senior living community. And she is here just with a wealth of knowledge about community living. So with that, welcome, Amy. So glad that you're joining us today.
Yes, thank you for having me. I'm excited. I love educating people about senior living.
And that really is the point of us being together today, is anything that we can do to cover topics that our listeners may be interested in, as it all ties back to the financial side of things. And so what we want to do is just go through kind of some major topics that might be on somebody's mind as they're thinking about living in a senior living community. But before we do that, I got to talk a little bit about how we got here and how Amy and I got connected. We have a mutual friend, former colleague of Amy's. They've been in Rotary together. And when we were talking about some of the things that go on with and questions that come from our clients, Morgan was like, this is our mutual friend. She's like, oh my gosh, I have the best person for you to talk to. And she mentioned Amy. And so here we are. She's amazing. She's brilliant is what I hear from everybody. And in fact, I was at breakfast with another mutual friend of Morgan and Amy's. And that's the last thing he left me was, oh my gosh, Amy is amazing. So lucky us listeners. We're going to love today's conversation. Our guest is not only incredibly talented, but deeply respected by her colleagues. And so that's a treat for all of us. So Amy, let's start by creating the environment. So my understanding is community livings can be rather broad. And my understanding they could be like a 55 plus living option, independent living, assisted living. It could include memory care, transitional care. I feel like those terminologies go on. And when I was growing up, it was a nursing home. And I don't even think that terminology gets used. So tell us the difference. Tell us what we need to know. Just set the scope for what is a senior community living situation.
Yeah, of course. So I actually talked with one of our residents one time because, I mean, I think if you ask any elder person, nobody wants to live in a senior living, right? I mean, I don't blame them. So, you want to live at home forever. But back in the day, nursing homes were more of where they put people who had psychiatric issues, where they didn't know what dementia and Alzheimer's was potentially. So when they were growing up, it was more of this place people kind of get put there because they don't have any other choices. So that kind of opened my eyes to understand why that generation doesn't want to be there. And I totally understand that. So yes, there's a lot of different ways a senior living can incorporate all of these. And it just depends on the community. For instance, Edgewood and Blaine, we have assisted living and memory care, but I also have other Edgewoods in the company that do have independent living or transitional care. So, 55 living option kind of says what it is. It's just an apartment building with 55 plus. They do have maybe some activities that people will get together and do and have a calendar, but I would say that's kind of it. It's just an apartment building with people around the same age. Independent living is usually connected to a senior living. So the good thing with that is then when you're ready to transition to assisted living or memory care, you're already in the same building. Or some buildings might do it where they can add cares even though they're in the independent side. So that's just where that depends on the place as well. And then assisted living, memory care, and transitional care. So transitional care would be more, like a rehab or things like that. That would also depend on the building. So when people just see senior living, they don't know. So because I've given tours and I'm like, it really sounds like you're more independent. Like you would benefit more from independent living versus an assisted living, because the point in assisted is you need some type of assistance, right? So that's just kind of where when you're calling to know the difference between places like this and what you would need is definitely, a good idea. And yes, a nursing home is outdated. It's called more of a skilled nursing facility. And it is kind of funny nowadays. You don't even really want to say facility. You want to say community, because it is a community. You know what I mean? It's not this hospital facility. It's a place where people live, the rest of their lives. So skilled nursing is more people use, but I mean, you can have 10 different things under a skilled nursing building and have no idea. So it's
Yeah,
very broad.
it can absolutely be confusing, and probably just starting to talk with somebody helps educate and get
Mhm.
their mind around things. So, hopefully, this whole conversation today will maybe have some aha moments for people along the way. So, in your role as an executive director, tell me about your team members. You have to have a tremendous team around you to be able to provide this level of care, but
Mhm.
also just the compassion that goes along with it. So, give us an idea of who is providing care to residents in your facility, which again is the assisted living and the memory care.
Yes. So we are a 59 bed community, all one level, and all of our staff care for both sides. Where there might be some communities where memory care is a different building or a wing, and then some people only work on that side. Where for us and our license, we staff don't know what side of the building they're working on until they get to work. So they could be working on memory care one day and the next day assisted living. So we sorry, I just lost my train of thought.
That's
What
good.
was
That was great. So primarily you are working with RNs, CNAs. Like,
Oh,
tell us
yes. Yep.
some of the licensure that goes along with it.
Yeah, so for us as well, under our license, we can hire PCAs, which are personal care assistants. So you could apply and say, I want to be a PCA, and then you would just get trained on the job. And we have all of our specific training through MDH requirements we follow. So we can hire those. And then PCAs and CNAs do the direct caregiving. But all of our departments are clinical, maintenance, housekeeping, activities, dining, and then reception. So it's their whole day put into one. So CNAs are certified nursing assistants. So that's where you would go get a class. And there's a lot of high schools in the area who pay for the class, which is really nice.
Okay.
So we have, they get their CNA, usually want to go into the healthcare field later in life. So they always start out in maybe senior living or hospital or something like that. So we hire PCAs and CNAs, and then we also have LPNs and then RNs. But where sometimes there's confusion, because when I have tours, people will say, well, there's an RN here 24/7. That would be more of a skilled nursing community. So I'll kind of say nursing home just so people know what I'm saying. You know what I mean? Even though they're not used to that terminology. So a nursing home would be something where they would have an RN around the clock, or at least an LPN 24 hours a day, because they have higher cares. For us, the only type of cares we don't offer are any type of lift. So no Hoyer lifts, easy stands, and then no specialized diets like pureed diets or stuff like that. But we have plenty of residents live their end of life there and all of that. So yeah, it's just a little bit different than others in the area.
And so we talked a little bit about skilled care. And again, this is probably getting a little too technical for the nature of what we're talking about today, but that probably makes an impact on who's paying for things,
Mhm.
and we're gonna come back to that side of things. So I just wanna put a pin in that as we're talking
Mhm.
about this, when you are getting care from somebody like a CNA or an LPN or some of those that might get distinguished as medical,
Mhm.
and therefore payment and some of that might look a little different. So we'll come back to that in a little bit here. But let's talk about the fun things that happen at your community. So we've talked
Yeah.
about the technical side, but like I said, I wanna come because I think it's gonna be fun.
Mhm.
Tell me about that side. You
Absolutely.
said activities.
Yes, we have a lot of great activities, and I mean, that's what residents look forward to really besides meals. Their days of doing fun things. We do the drum class where you put the yoga ball on a hamper and then hit it with the drumsticks. We have an amazing local farm that brings miniature ponies dressed up. We had sustainable safari come in with animals they could pet and hold. We have a lot of generous singers who might come in and volunteer their time or people to come play the piano. We do a lot of seasonal crafts, baking class. Yeah, I mean, anything happy hour 3 times a week. So,
Nice. And so how do you find the people that come in? Are they people that volunteer, or is it things that sometimes they volunteer, sometimes you outsource it to a company
yeah,
that helps?
sometimes both. Well, sometimes we find people where it's a paid thing, but a lot of people just stop in knowing, the budget for senior living isn't huge and just want to offer their services or their talents and doing stuff like that. So it's really fun.
That's neat. And I brought that up because as our listeners are, oftentimes may have a little extra time on their hands, maybe
Hmm.
that's a thought that would satisfy them as well as being able to be a part of
Absolutely.
some of the activities at a senior living community. So the three main things that I want to cover today is, well, first of all, back up before we go into this. Why do you think somebody should want to listen to this show today, and what might they take away from it or get from it in general?
As someone who didn't has only been in this industry for 5 years, so I know what it's like to not be in it. It's just everyone is going to need something out of this conversation at some point in their life because all of us are gonna get old. Our grandparents, our parents, ourselves are gonna get old, and then if we have kids, so then you need to help your kids prepare for yourself, because now I just feel like I'm an advocate for telling my friends to get paperwork done or get this done, or I'm talking to my mom's aged friends about their parents and finding senior living. So it's definitely a skill every single person in the world will need it to some extent and at some point.
Yeah, it's so true. And there's so much conversation about people being in the sandwich generation. And so, whether we're talking about you and what you're preparing for in 20 years potentially, or we're talking about your parents, or we're talking about how to help your kids be, helping control what you can control so your kids don't have to. I mean, it
Mhm.
really does run the gamut of who might take something away from this. Well, what I'm hoping to cover today as three key areas. And so, when should somebody start talking to a community? When are, or what are some of the key things that might be important to ask as you go through that process? And then, how do you pay for all of this? And what are some of the goods and bads along the way
Mhm.
when it comes to the payment side of things? So, let's start with, why would somebody want to consider living in a senior living community versus that aging in place? Because so many say, I just want to age at home. My
Mhm.
kids will take care of me. We will figure it out. So
Mhm.
tell us why a senior living community might be an alternative that they would appreciate.
I would say number one reason is safety, just because you never know what's actually happening when the kids aren't there to help take care of them. And then another thing would just be more of a peace of mind for those caregivers. We see a lot of people who are at the end of their rope in caregiver burnout, and they're not going to maybe say that to their loved one or their parent or whoever just because, they want to be there to do anything they need. So I would just say that balance of because when they live in the community, the point is you should be able to come and visit with your mom or your dad or your aunt and uncle, not coming to work, at their house, which I totally understand. All of us will do anything for our loved ones, but it also comes a time where it can't just be transactional. Like there has to be, your family. You're supposed to have fun and not worry about bills and making food and doing all this stuff. So I would say those things. And then there's one more thing I was going to say. Oh, another big thing is, I don't also think people realize if you're alone, how much that affects your brain and your
Mhm.
mind. For instance, I moved home from college and I lived with my grandpa for 3 years. And even, I had to work full time and, had activities, things going on. But I remember, we'd come home and talk multiple times a day. And as the years go on, I can tell you from just talking to me, a couple hours a day and all that, his memory got so much better and just their personality and their happiness. I don't think you realize how much interacting with humans, however many times a day, really is so helpful for their brain and just their everyday mental health.
Absolutely, and you see it firsthand, and I know how many statistics are out there that talk about the human interaction and how important that is, and you're just living it every
Mhm.
day and can see it firsthand. So, let's go down here on to our first topic. So, when should someone start the process of researching and visiting a facility? And will you just give us the process or the perspective from the facility, so
Mhm.
as your role as an executive director?
For sure. I see plenty of people who come and are say, I'm doing great at home. I'm not ready, but I want to have my top 2 places when I am ready. And I think that's amazing. That is great because if something happens, then you already have your list of I've already toured these. I know what they look like. This is where I want to be. But my biggest thing I like to tell people who are on the fence is it's better to pick when you're able to choose versus when you're forced. And what I mean by that is, let's say your mom's at home and she falls and breaks her hip. Well, then she's at the hospital going to a rehab, but they will not release her to live at home alone. So then you either have to live with her or home care has to be in there 24/7. But then at that point, maybe if they wanted to live at Edgewood, we don't have a room open. So I tell people, if you're going to maybe end up here in a year or so, what's the worst if you come 6 months to a year early if it's where you want to be? So I just think that's the biggest thing is if you're almost ready, just if you found the place you want to be, just kind of start doing that process, which I know that's super easy for me to say, like, just move in, it's no big deal. But I know it's a lot. It's really hard for them, leave their home they've lived in for 60 years, all of that. But it's just better if you are able to choose because and going back to that, so then if I'm full and maybe their number 2 choice is full, you're kinda going to a community maybe you haven't toured, but you're limited on time, and then you have to find a place with an opening and depending on your financial situation, so it's just a lot of factors where if you can just move in without all of that stress, it would just make it so mu that much more enjoyable, really.
Absolutely, doing it when it's on your terms and you're in control without a lot of other added pressure sounds like
Mhm.
a much more enjoyable process.
Yes.
Let me ask a question about that. So, can you put yourself on a wait list or will you go through that concept? Is that something that Edgewood offers as a wait list or how does
Mhm.
that work?
Yeah, definitely. So right now, for instance, my memory care is full, so I have a wait list, and then I just check in, every so often, see how things are going. But if I have a room open, I maybe just if they want to still be on the wait list, let's say they're not ready, I'll say, okay, maybe I'll call you in 2 months to see how things are going, how you feeling, stuff like that. So even though I have rooms available, I can still have a wait list. Sorry, excuse me. And then after that, I would just call them every once in a while and say, "Hey, are you ready? How are things going?" Kind of do it that way. So even though if I have rooms open, I will still have a wait list and just see, or maybe they're waiting specifically for a 2 bedroom, which doesn't come open that often. So then kind of things like that.
Okay, yeah. So get your name on the wait list if we're getting close. Even if you're not
Mhm.
ready to pull the trigger on making that move, that would be an option for people.
Because then the community will still be checking in with you every so often and maybe say, "Hey, I only have one room right now," and they're like, "Okay, maybe I should just do it now." You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. So tell us about a story, someone you've served when they're working through that, finding a facility, and just give us maybe something about did they start at the right time and it was a great outcome, or was it maybe a horror story? Horror story sounds horrible, but
Yeah.
like it's bad news because they didn't have things in a row. Do you have any story that you could share with our listeners?
I was when I read this question, I was thinking about it, and to be honest, there are just so many of them that are so alike. So
Sure.
I'll kinda go through my top 3 maybe scenarios where it's the most common tour I see where one is, they're in a rush because maybe they're in a rehab, or maybe they didn't realize how bad mom or dad's dementia or Alzheimer's is, but then they don't have any power of attorney paperwork done, and that resident cannot sign paperwork for themselves because they're not allowed.
Of
Sorry.
sound mind.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's hard because you have to rush get this paperwork done. And then we're trying to kind of assist and help when we can, but our hands are tied when you can't, have the resident sign the paperwork. And that just adds so much stress and all that hardship for them. So that's a big one I see, just because then they won't, again, the hospital or the rehab won't allow the resident to move home alone if they're not going to be safe. So honestly, the biggest thing everyone needs to take from this call is just safety for the resident, what's best for them in that way as well. And then
What I'm hearing you say kind of on repeat, but in different ways, is it's so important to work ahead,
mhm,
even when your opinion is, I'm going to age in place or I am great right now. But you get yourself into a situation where you're great today, tomorrow you have a stroke and you don't have a POA
mhm,
in place, power of attorney in place, and then your hands get tied of how
mhm,
quickly you can move and the type of care you might be able to get. And so you're playing this game of this has to get done before we do this and we need to
mhm,
do this by this date. And
mhm,
that's a very stressful situation for
mhm,
especially somebody that's aging to go through. And then, I think
mhm,
about people that are still working full-time jobs and have other
mhm,
responsibilities and
mhm,
could still have kids living at home. Like it becomes a lot on a family. So control what you can control
mhm,
as soon as you can take action. Start the process so you're informed and you're educated. And
mhm,
hopefully, when things do happen, it's a seamless transition. You've already made the decisions and you're in control of what's happening around you.
mhm.
Anything else that you want to share about an experience or something that you see, or is that a pretty good standard one?
I would say another one is talk, and again, nobody wants to talk about this, right? When I get older and I can't help myself. And, if you're gonna dedicate, family dynamics are crazy, right? Everyone has their own things that go on in their family, but I would say the biggest thing is advocating what you want for yourself, because if you have 6 kids, you can only have so many people as power of attorney or healthcare directive. Everyone needs to be on the same page, because I can't tell you how many times I'll have 2 power of attorneys and one thinks they should move in, one thinks they shouldn't, and, there's that push and pull dynamic. But at the end of the day, it's about what the resident wants, not what they think should happen for the resident, and I know that gets hard because maybe all of us their dementia progresses and then they say, "Well, I don't wanna live in one of these places," but 10 years ago, that is what they wanted, and they put power of attorneys in place for a reason. I trust you to do what my wishes are when that time comes, which I know is really hard because I have people come in all the time and, when they get dementia, they say, I don't want to live here, you're abandoning me. And but I just try to empower them to know, like, if roles were reversed, they would be doing this for you. In your heart, this is what you need to do for yourself, for them, and just to stand by that. And it's not about anyone else but the resident. So talking about what do I want later in life and putting it on paper with a notary and all of that, because it shouldn't be what anyone just thinks about it. It's what they want. This is what they're going to do, and then follow that.
Yeah, absolutely. Uh, Really prompts the next question. An area that I want to talk about is what are some of the key things that people should ask? And maybe you have a checklist or maybe you have
Mhm.
categories at least, but can you give us some direction on that? If I'm coming in to see you and go through the process, what should I know and how can you lead me through that?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I get people who call all the time and they say, "This is my first phone call," and they ask their questions they have, and I say, "Okay, add this question, this question, this question." You know what I mean? Just because a lot of times people are just calling to see what openings you have or pricing. But then I'm like, okay, well, ask these questions as well, because this matters with everything else. So number one would definitely be openings. Do you have any open rooms on whatever side they need? The second thing would be, definitely getting pricing to make sure it is affordable. And then when we talk more about elderly waiver and, county assistance, that comes into play because some places require a certain amount of private pay before you can go on county assistance. So if you can't meet 2 years of private pay and they won't work with you on that, then obviously that's not an option either. And then just the level of care again, if somebody's already uh 3-person assist or needs a lift, maybe someplace like mine wouldn't work because we don't do lifts, but we can. I don't like how I said that.
You sounded great so far.
I
You
know.
can start over from the top if you want, or Do you want me to ask the question again?
Yeah, sorry.
So, where you have taken us so far really is leading me into the next question. And if I am coming to start the process, there's probably some areas that I already know going into it, but there's probably a whole checklist that you have that you want
Mhm.
me to know. Can you give us some of the key areas or questions that you would suggest that we ask when we go through the process?
Yeah, I would just say because I have people who call all the time and say, "This is my first call. I don't really know what I'm doing." So after they ask their questions, I go, "Okay, add this to the list, this and this." So I'll kind of give you the quick. If you're just doing your due diligence of checking boxes, this is what I would do. So for sure, if they have openings, seeing how many rooms they have available with whatever side you would need, assisted living or memory care, asking about the finances because some places need, 2 years private pay or things like that before you could go on county assistance. So just making sure that's affordable that way. And then making sure that what's included because there are a lot of places that do a la carte versus care is all included into like a service level, if that kind of makes sense.
Mhm.
So, that just is a different way to pay for things and just to know the process. Definitely size is a big thing. I have some residents who, a family member will tour and say, they're really introverted. So we want to have a smaller community where someone walks in and goes, "This is way too small. I want one of the 3-story ones that are 100 plus," which that's great. If that's what they need, then just kind of knowing what would be best for them and, knowing the activities or meals and all of that as well.
Absolutely. Um, any aha moments or a piece of advice that may help them for the day that they come to the community? We've
Mhm.
already
Yep,
decided we're
yep.
not gonna use the word facility, and I'm so glad you said that. But yeah, any aha moments for the once you get there and you're ready to move in and setting expectations, anything from that
Mhm.
perspective?
Yes, because I have people who they go, we've toured, they don't even know how many places. And, every senior living's the same in some way. They have, the rooms, the people, the activities, all of that. So when I'm touring them and we're kind of getting to the end, it's just how did you feel walking through here? How did you feel with the other ones? Because you're living here 24/7, hopefully forever. So what do you feel in all of these different places? Because this is going to be your home. A big thing we say is our residents don't live in our workplace; we work in their home.
Mm.
So that is the biggest thing: is can you see yourself walking these halls 8 times a day and doing that? So just how do you feel when you're here? Because every place kind of has the same stuff for the most part, and finances, blah blah blah. But it's just about how you feel while you're here, interacting with staff and all of that, because this is gonna be your home, you know what I mean? Even though it's an apartment, this is your home, so
It reminds me of making the college decision. It really is as you
Mhm,
go through life,
mhm,
you're gonna be here for the next 4 years or you're gonna be here for it's funny how that I've never put those 2 things together, but
mhm,
that might be something people can associate with as they've made decisions like that. All right, let's get into that conversation about cost. And you've said a couple things to me that I have questions on, but just start with helping us understand what goes into the cost of care because all you hear about is how expensive it is and how
mhm,
it's only going to go up. So set the stage of just give us an idea of like why is it so expensive and then we'll dig into kind
mhm.
of giving us some guidelines of things we might want to know.
Yeah, for sure. So, again, something I didn't realize because all my grandparents have passed away, but they've been in, transitional care units or memory care, things like that, and the only thing that pays for the entire building is what the residents pay. Like, we don't have this big separate fund of, "Oh, well, we're short on residents, so here's all this extra cash because we're
Mhm.
low that month." Everything what you pay pays for where it is in the city costs, water, heating, electric, staff, health benefits, every, food on the table. So what their room and board and service level is what pays the bills at all. So, and if you are thinking about it to get, so for a community like ours, we have housekeeping, laundry, all meals, cable and internet included in room and board. So if you really divide the price by that, let's say if their house is paid off, but it's not, room for a rent or an apartment, it evens out a little bit, especially with difference of care. Some people aren't going to need as much care. And then maybe when they need more care, at least it's there. So it's about kind of convenience and the assistance. But
Yeah.
yes, I totally understand where people are coming from, but also with being in Minnesota, we can do the county assistance help and all of that. So there are ways to make it work, but yes, I understand that perspective, but
Um, two concepts, and I want to go to the county portion as one of our next conversations. But you think about anything in life is either you're going to do it or you're going to outsource it and you're going to have to pay for
mhm,
somebody. And so this is no different, really, is you're just paying for the services and the support that you need, and
mhm,
everything comes with a price tag and sometimes 2 these
mhm,
days. And so,
mhm,
okay, so let's go into that conversation about county assistance. And so there's different terminology that goes around this, I believe, but let's make sure we're saying the same thing. So Medicaid,
mhm,
medical assistance, and you've referred to it as county assistance. That's
mhm,
all the same topic. They're synonymous
mhm,
for each other. And so you say it county assistance simply because that's how it's managed. It's managed through each county.
mhm,
Okay, so let's go through. You said something earlier that was new for me, and I want to make sure I understand. So if somebody cannot stay at home
mhm,
and they have nobody there, but they need to be somewhere, they could live in a facility or a community.
mhm.
And so is that any community, or is that it has to be one that's dedicated to a medical assistance or term that or has beds for that?
It would depend, I guess, on their finances. Because if they're at home, they would need to sell their house most likely to pay for the community. But if it's someone who's maybe already in a 55 plus apartment and they're on elderly waiver, it's called, but county assistance is just more people understand that. So if they're on that, then yes, you would need to go somewhere where you can find county where they have rooms available for someone starting out on county assistance. And just from the background of that, think about obviously a senior living is where people live and love and all of that. But at the end of the day, we do have to pay the bills. So if you have, 10 residents on county assistance, that might be half the amount of a private pay amount. So the money still has to come from somewhere. So when people are saying, well, they won't, and some communities won't accept elderly waiver at all. I apologize. I was going to say that earlier with questions when you ask, do you accept elderly waiver? Because a lot of companies won't accept that. I'm very thankful I work for Edgewood and they do because, not everybody has unlimited amounts of money, however their life is planned out. So making sure a community accepts elderly waiver, because if you're somewhere where they don't, I mean, you can't stay if you can't pay what the invoice is. So that was one big thing I wanted to just touch on. And
And
so
is that, sorry, a situation for clarifying? Are some facilities dedicated 100% to accepting elderly waiver, or is it by beds so that it
it's
can
just
be a
kind of managed
mix?
at the community.
Okay.
But then there are, depending on what your license is also different. So depending if you're, so we have an assisted living license where if you have a nursing home license, you can get paid by Medicaid in the state. So
Okay.
that's also a little different too, where you can get money from other places, not just from the residents' money. You know what I mean? So,
Yes.
but ours is strictly just from, room and board and all of that.
Okay. So another thing you said was sometimes it requires 2 years of being able to private pay
Mhm.
before you become eligible. Will you just
Mhm.
tell us a little bit about that concept?
Yeah, so it's just kind of looking at, I mean, a lot of people kind of figure that out more from like corporate would tell us that, but also the director of the community just managing the finances, working with, their accounts payable, like how are we looking with residents who are on county assistance versus private pay? Like, could I take a couple residents on county assistance right away and still be okay that way financially?
Yeah.
So it's just kind of about managing it that way at each community level.
It's
But
running a business. I
yes,
mean,
yep, exactly.
okay. So definitely put that in the category of understanding how a community accepts people that are
Mhm,
on the elderly waiver and
mhm,
where that could be not today, but that
mhm,
could be something that ends up happening, and
mhm,
just making sure that you know how that transition works and the ins and outs of it.
mhm, absolutely.
Perfect. Anything else as it relates to the cost side of things? What are the most common ways that people pay? We've covered private pay, and we have covered now the opposite end of that, which could be the medical assistance. What about long term care insurance or other long term care? Anything that you can offer on that, or is it really comes down to two or three things, and long-term care may be one of those options.
I would say out of my 58 residents, I have maybe 5 or 6 who are on long-term care insurance. So, if your parent is one of those that has those, that's amazing. And also, that would be another thing where if I get moving, you don't want to leave your home, but also if it's getting paid for by long-term care insurance, why wouldn't you? You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Because at the end of the day, we'll pay the money eventually. So if someone else is paying it, then you can just kind of get a jump start. I do know it depends on your policy because I think back in the day, there are things they put in there where they won't cover an assisted living. They'll only cover a nursing home. And one thing, it's very confusing to figure out, but when I've been dealing with these long-term care companies, a big thing is the resident has to meet certain criteria. So 5 things would be feeding, showering, toileting, dressing, and
Transferring?
yes, yep.
Yep.
That's so if they only meet 2 of those, they're not gonna pay. So and they'll come and put eyes on the resident, which I'm sure people have had insurance fraud and said, "Oh, this resident does all 5 of these things," and then they're completely independent, you know what I mean? Just to get them to pay for the community. So I understand where they're coming from with that, but just understanding your parents' insurance policy is huge because then you get them in a place you've already dedicated or committed to paying this amount per month. Long-term care goes through, and then you realize, well, my parent doesn't meet all these needs, and you can't lie about it. So then they're not going to pay until they need those kind of cares.
Yep, absolutely. Another one that comes somewhat from my previous life is aid and attendance, it being available through the federal government for veterans. Have
Mhm.
you ran into that much? And is that something that still is applicable from time to time for your residents?
I've had some family members talk to me about that, and most of the time, it's spouses who are still alive. So it's really just on the family or the power of attorney to go through that process to try to get benefits from veterans. So, they have to submit all that paperwork, and then that money goes excuse me, all that money goes right into the resident's account. I know obviously it's more if the actual veteran is still alive versus the spouse, but obviously $1,500 a month helps with anything. So I just know it's kind of on their end, but yeah, I have a lot of residents who get that every month, or they didn't even know they could, even though there's a spouse. So
Sure.
most of the time, spouses can get money as well. And then just going back to how things are paid for, long-term care insurance, like you said, but Social Security, what they get each month, pensions, or, your spouse's pension, sale of a house, life insurance money, veterans benefits, like you said. So there's definitely a lot of different ways. It's also kind of a hard thing because some people be like, oh, I don't know how this resident's been paying this long. And I'm like, well, I don't know either. I'm not going to ask them. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? It's
yeah,
obviously their personal story and finances. So sometimes I don't know how some people, get all that money as well, but
yeah.
obviously they prepared in life very well financially if they're able to do that.
Yeah. And so, one more question, and this maybe just you don't, but is there a role that your team plays in helping somebody apply for county assistance because maybe they've already been living there and they're to the
Mhm.
point that they don't have any private funds available? Tell us, do you get involved or don't get involved?
Yeah, so my spiel on that is we're kind of really a third party when it comes to that because it's really between the power of attorney and the county. But what I'll say is just I'll kind of say it to you like your loved one lives at Edgewood and you're
Yeah.
saying, "Hey, they're about to run out of money. What should I do?" So the county kind of depends. Like a couple of years ago, they were saying have people only call 3 months before they run out of money. And now it's, well, they need $3,000 left in their account before they can apply. So it just kind of varies on how busy things are, how things change over the years. So if your mom was going to run out of money on October 1st, you would tell me, and then you're going to contact the county. So what we have to pull each month, the state decides what residents pay for room and board on county assistance, which is right now it's $1,192. So that's decided by the state. They tell us each year, how much because it changes each year, it goes up. So then I would tell you, we're only pulling the 1192 on all of our pulls for each invoice until, you get pushed through and it comes through on the invoice. So then you would submit all the paperwork. And then usually I'm just kind of checking in, the county, Anoka County specifically is extremely backlogged, which, some counties are better than others. I think Anoka County just restructured a lot. So There's, sometimes it can take 3 months. Sometimes it's taken me a year to get a resident through county assistance. So I just kind of help with when I talk with families and know the process. So you would do that. You're submitting all the paperwork. So how it works is elderly waivers kind of an umbrella, and then the two under it are financial and medical assistance. So they'll get approved for medical assistance, and then they will get approved for financial. I have never experienced a resident get denied. I've been asked, how does that work? And I'm also curious. I have no idea how they would get denied. But yeah, so you have to, submit a lot of paperwork, and yes, saddle up because it's a lot of work, and I feel bad because I know it's a lot of work for the families, but to be able to live where you're going to live when your bill's usually 8,000 and only being able to pay 2,000 is huge. I'm
Yeah.
so grateful that Edgewood accepts that because, they paid their dues. They're allowed to stay there. Yeah. So sorry, getting back on track. So then the biggest thing I always stress to families is after you submit everything through the county will set up an assessment where they come to put eyes on the resident. But the biggest thing is they only back pay to that date. So if your mom ran out of money on October 1st, but they're coming to do the assessment on October 15th, you have to private pay from the 1st to the 14th, because then whether it takes 8 months for everything to go through, the county is going to back pay to October 15th.
And that's when they had eyes on and they did the assessment.
So that's when the assessment is. So on the flip side of the coin, if I'm accepting a resident to move into the community on elderly waiver, they always have to have their assessment done before they move in, because you just don't want to get in a situation where, well, all of a sudden you need to private pay for 20 days, but you're not able to, it's not fair to anyone involved. So whenever I accept someone on elderly waiver, I always make sure they've already had their assessment from the county completed.
There's so many moving parts. It can really blow your mind on the detail that you need to know to get through the process, on top of already handling the emotional piece that we're making a transition. Change is not always easy, especially when you start getting into some of the memory care portion of it. It complicates it as well with change. And so what a reassuring conversation that we're having, or an influential conversation of like, let's get on top of control what we can control when we control it, educate ourselves, make decisions. And so many people have a hard time making a decision in this category, but make decisions or get something put in place. And I think that's the message I feel like you have told us all the way through is, go ahead and pull the trigger. And I often think about, when you do make a decision, what's the worst case scenario if I make this decision? Well, if they make the decision to move in or put their name on the wait list, well, my name comes off the wait list if I don't want to do this. And so sometimes you have to think in that capacity of, what's the worst thing if I say this or this? And
it's a 30-day lease. So then you move out after a month or after a week, it's exactly.
Yeah. And I know a move is a big deal, but there's always, I believe there's gray to everything, and there's a version that you can work through, but making a decision is half of the battle there.
And sorry, there was one more thing I wanted to touch on. I was looking at my notes. Before you, piece of advice before you come in, to senior livings is getting that pay. I know we talked about your wishes and all of that, but having a power of attorney, having a healthcare directive. I mean, those things are huge. I mean, I have residents who they signed all their paperwork themselves, and their kid is still their power of attorney, because obviously residents can I think that's also a misconception with family members, is because I'm power of your attorney, because I am your power of attorney, I get to make decisions. And that is not the case. You're essentially there to help if they're not able to, but it's not your life still, it's still the residents' rights. Okay. Like, it's still their choice, what they want. But yes, should they have to fill out 30 pages with their signature on it? No, like, you can do that, so
that's good.
Being that power of attorney, a healthcare directive, I mean, things happen really fast, really quick. And then my thing is, you're just kind of paying money for no reason for rights you should have already had over your loved one. You know what I mean? If they didn't have it and things go into probate or stuff like that,
Yeah.
So,
well, what good perspectives. Is there anything else that we haven't covered that you wish you could share with people, or that you do regularly share with people, and that we haven't covered it today?
Yeah. Sorry, I saw something on my notes and then I wanted to say it. Yeah, there are just some things I wrote down on my notes when I was reading through the questions. And, the biggest thing when residents are scared to move in, I've had residents crying during tours because, of course, it's hard moving to a new place. Again, they've lived in their house for 50 plus years. But every single resident in that community has been where they are. My residents love when new residents move in, or even tours, saying hi, telling them how much they love the community. You're going to have a support system because everyone has been where you are. And then they're on the other side where they've already been through the transitional period,
Mhm.
and now they love where they are. They love where they're living. So having the support, and staff understand too how hard it is. All of us get where they're coming from. Obviously, maybe we're not living it, but knowing that all of us are there to support them is good. And then just when your topics we haven't covered, this industry is amazing and so rewarding, and I'm so glad it fell into my lap. And now, senior living is my industry I work in. But also, we're working with vulnerable adults, which it's very easy for them to get taken advantage of. I can't even tell you how many times we hang up phones in their room because, some
Mhm.
scammers calling them or that. But definitely do your due diligence on communities, read the reviews. You can even go on MDH and read their reports for tags they've gotten.
And
You,
that's the Minnesota Department of Health
Yes.
website. Okay.
Yep. Every person gets audited however often, and, has to have things kept per the state's guidelines. Talk about when you're doing tours, talk about staff retention, management retention, things like that. Because, communities are kind of only as good as their staff and their
Mhm.
management, because if management's not holding people accountable, then, you know, how is anything being held accountable? Standards, cleanliness, all of that. So, and usually you can tell that on a tour. And I've talked to people, they say, yeah, I, just walked in and didn't like the feel, but, trust your instincts, and honestly, don't be afraid to ask a question. And if it makes them uncomfortable, then clearly they don't want to answer it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So don't be afraid to ask any question you want to. I mean, your loved one's living there, and it's your job to ask the tough questions for sure.
Yeah, such good perspective. I hadn't thought about the reviews or the things that might be available through the Minnesota Department of Health website, and
Mm-hmm.
just people can put anything out there on the
Mm-hmm.
website. So maybe just Googling a community name, things might pop up in that way as well.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this has been absolutely fantastic. You've been an amazing guest, a tremendous resource with just things that, yes, maybe we've thought about, part of this, but you don't know how to far to take it or some of the answers. And you've certainly given us legs to keep moving on. So again, thank you so much. Anything else before we wrap up?
I don't think so. Thanks for having me. And I know it was probably very overwhelming. Hopefully, when you're listening to this, this doesn't stress you out more, because as you start the process and give yourself time, it gets a lot easier when you have things in place. So, yeah, I hope it was just educational for people. And I'm just here to talk about everyone to get a power of attorney, get your healthcare directive.
Absolutely. I love that. Well, again, we've been with Amy Waterman of Edgewood Community in Blaine. And so great to have her and talking about the senior living, the community and what's available and what some of the differences are, and,
Mhm.
and lots of different avenues we've gone down today. So, and for our listeners, thanks for listening to Paladin Financial Talk. If you like this episode, go out there and do me a huge favor and leave a review. That helps us get the podcast in more ears and make sure that we're helping more people on their financial journey. So everybody can listen on any of the platforms that are out there for podcasts. You can also view us on YouTube or reach out to us at 651-842-8406 or visit paladinfinancial.com. Thanks for joining us, Amy.
Thank you so much.